Her triumphs, I took a group of women that didn't believe in themselves, and I just believed in them. Her trials.
I never wanted to go to practice. I was losing a ton of weight.
Her story.
I just put my faith in God and just trusted the system.
Her why.
I want people to see what I did and say, oh, that's so awesome. I'm going to be better than that. That would be how I hope that this journey ends.
This is Her Why, where we tell the stories from BYU women's sports. Here is your host, Lauren McLean.
We're so glad you've joined us for Her Why, where we celebrate the women who make BYU sports great. Joining us today is Lesa Burgess, wife of BYU men's basketball assistant coach Chris Burgess, former Division I soccer player, mom of 5, and now a published author. In her new book, Behind the Bench, a memoir of a basketball wife, Lesa opens up about what it's like to build a life around the game, from raising a family overseas to navigating the ups and downs of a coaching career to learning how to hold on to herself in seasons where she didn't always feel seen. Lesa, thank you so much for coming on with me.
Of course. Thanks for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
There's so much good stuff to talk about with you. I'm really excited for this. So let's jump into your new book, Behind the Bench. What first inspired you to write and to share that story now in your time of life?
It's kind of a long time coming, actually. It's the experiences that we had living overseas, watching Chris play, raising the kids. It happened kind of, this makes me sound really old, but it was back before social media and before we had a lot of documentation about kind of what our lives were like. And it made me really want to write the stories down for my kids. So that's how it began. I just wanted the stories to be written down because I wasn't very good at journaling in the midst of all of that chaos. And so I wanted to write the stories. But through the years, as we would come home during the off season, I would tell friends some of my stories and they would just be like, oh my gosh, you have to write a book. And I don't know that I ever would have thought about writing a book if they wouldn't have said that, but they said it so much that it planted a seed in my brain, and eventually it kind of became a dream of mine to be able to do that. So I started with writing the stories down and eventually was like, you know what, maybe some people can find some value and connection out of these stories as well. And it turned into a book that I hope people can enjoy to read,
Yes. So what was the writing process like for you? Because were you an English major? Were you a good writer, or was this something you're like, all right, we'll just see how this turns out?
Not at all. I have never considered myself a writer. I enjoyed writing in school, but I wasn't very good. I didn't consider myself a writer at all. So the process was interesting. It started by just word vomiting, honestly, and just getting chronologically everything out onto paper or onto a computer.
Yeah.
And after that, I spoke with a friend. I had some help from one of my good friends she had a lot of talent with writing. And so she was the one that really helped me kind of try and find a structure for the book. In the meantime, I read a ton of memoirs myself to try and get an understanding of what they sounded like. And there were a couple that I definitely pulled from as inspiration of how I wanted to structure my book. And once I figured out how to structure it and get an outline, it all came pretty naturally. And then it was just a bunch of editing.
Yeah. Oh, the worst part.
Yeah.
Were there any parts of your story that you feel like were especially hard to put into words?
All the hard stuff.
Yeah.
There were stories that were just more like, challenging, but in hindsight, just really kind of funny to talk about. The hard stuff was harder to get in. I think that, the deeper the emotions, the harder it is to capture that in words, especially trying to paint a picture of living in an environment that is so different than what we currently live in. It's hard to get that on paper.
Yeah.
And I know that you're never going to I just had to kind of accept that you're never going to fully get it on there.
Right.
But you get it on there as much as you can.
You do the best you can.
Yeah.
And you share in the book a beautiful and messy story, just a bunch of different types of stories. Was it scary at times to kind of open up and be vulnerable and think a lot of people are going to be reading about my life?
Not really. I feel like I'm a pretty open person. I mean, I don't share initially, but I feel like once I get to know someone, I'm pretty open. And it's just so unique. It's such a unique life. I've found that a lot of people enjoy listening to the stories just because they're so different.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the stories all come back to experiences just like anybody else. Challenges, trials, how you face those. And so I think that is why I was just like, there's stuff to learn in these stories. And even though the experiences are so unique, people can still relate to them because we all go through challenges. Mm-hmm. We all go through crazy experiences in our life.
You've had some wild experiences overseas, and some you shared on your Instagram page for the book, which I went through and I loved. I'm like, these are crazy stories. And these little kids, I think about your little kids being all over the world when they're just little, and I loved reading about those. Is there a funny or unforgettable story you can tell us just to give us a taste of what we'll find in Behind the Bench?
I feel like one of the funnier stories that we end up telling people a lot is just we took our dog with us overseas, and he wasn't a small dog. It was a sporting dog. He's a Weimaraner. She kept me feeling safe a lot of times in some, alone, like uncertain type of experiences. And so I really liked having our dog with us most of the time. I took her out running when we were living in the Ukraine. And it was a way for me to try and help get over the jet lag, get some energy, clear my mind. And I really enjoyed running as a former soccer player. Yeah. Obviously, it's something that I continue to try and do. And we set off. I didn't really know the area very well. We ended up running past a pack of wild dogs, and they chased us. And
oh my gosh.
I legit was fearing for my life. I think my dog was also fearing for her life. And we finally got far enough away from them. And all of a sudden I realized I don't know where I am other than going back the exact same way that I came. And this was, before GPS. I couldn't go on my phone and find a different route. It was all by landmarks. And so we had to catch our breath and run past them again. And it was terrifying. But it was also one of those experiences that we look back on and just laugh because when does that happen? It's just crazy,
A pack of wild dogs following you around.
Yeah.
I also read that with that same dog, because you guys just lived in an apartment building, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned going up and down the elevator and people just being mortified that you had a dog there, right?
When she was a puppy and trying to house train her in this apartment that had this slow old elevator. And I don't think that it was super kosher to have inside dogs where we were. And everyone hated us. It was terrible.
You're sorry, we know you already hate Americans, but here we are with a dog.
Yep. I started going up and down the stairs.
Yeah.
That's how bad it was. So
in your book, there's a chapter called I Wear Sweatpants, where you talk about going home during the off season and feeling more like you again, but also how hard it became when people only asked about Chris and not about you. So what was it like to feel overlooked even by the people who you felt like knew you best?
It was interesting because, as a soccer player, I was used to, I was a defender. It's not like I got a ton of praise. Defenders are kind of,
the unsung heroes.
The unsung heroes, yeah. Your stat line is zeros at the end of a game, regardless of how well you did. And, so it's not like I was used to just tons of praises all the time, but you still get recognition. You still receive accolades. You still feel like you're this important part of a successful team, right? And so going from that to, being a wife and a mom and living on the other side of the world, it just was such a flip-flop. And it took a while to figure out how to manage that, feel like my identity wasn't completely lost in a proximity, right? I'm his wife and I'm their mom. And And then, we would come home for the off seasons and I would be so excited to like see friends and people that I knew. And a lot of times the conversation would always end up being about Chris, which I love talking about Chris. I still do, right? But I felt invisible because nobody was asking about me anymore.
Yeah.
And it was tricky.
Yeah.
I loved Chris so much, but I started to resent the questions some because, I wanted to be seen. I wanted people to understand how me supporting Chris was helping him be successful, but I just felt invisible a lot. And so that was, it took a number of years for me to like understand that it's okay that they ask those questions. It's okay that they don't see me like Chris sees me and Chris knows, and that's all I need.
Did it impact how you saw yourself?
No, it didn't. I think that it took some time for me to figure out who I was without soccer. Mm-hmm. But I think that I was just born with this innate sense of self. And I'm really lucky that way. I think that I look back on my childhood and some of the challenges that I've been through, and I think that that's a huge blessing in my life. And I think that it is what helped me eventually see my supporting role as like not only important, but like I'm so proud of it.
Yeah. Over the years, how have you gotten better at holding on to who you are, especially while supporting Chris's career and adding 5 kids to that mix as well?
Yeah, I think that it's all about how you look at it, right? It's about your perspective. I started to gain an understanding of like, maybe I'm not a part of a team and maybe, people don't see me for what I do, but I can take pride in who I am and what I do. And I know that by supporting Chris, like his successes are also mine.
Yeah.
And same with my kids, right? Like, especially as they've gotten older and especially as they've started like leaving the house, it's been important for me to help teach my girls that whoever they are, like they're enough.
Yeah.
Just the way you are, and that you have strength and you have power, regardless of if you're a volleyball player now or, afterwards.
Right.
And to take that strength and like really just, you really do sometimes have to look inside and rely on your faith. I think I relied on my testimony a lot to know that I was enough.
Yeah. What does that look like for you now in a day-to-day life to show up for yourself, not just in your roles, but as Lesa?
That's a tricky question.
Probably depends on the day.
Yeah, I think it depends on the day. I mean, some days I feel like my whole life is about doing things for other people.
Yeah.
And I think all moms can feel like that, right? I think that there are things that you do have to find that are important to you. I think writing this book was one of the ways that I was like, this is a piece of me that I want to share. It's a piece of me that I don't think a lot of people like know. Mm-hmm. I mean, really know.
Right.
And I'm actually really excited for people to read it and to get their thoughts and see how they can relate to my stories. Because again, I think my stories are very similar to a lot like of women, moms, especially athletes. Yeah. It takes a certain level of commitment and sacrifice to play at a high level. Every athlete knows that. Every high-level athlete knows that. And it inevitably becomes a part of your identity, which is a good thing. I was always so proud to say that I was a soccer player. But it's very natural that when that goes away, a huge part of your identity goes away with it, and you have to figure out who you are without that. And it takes time. And I think it took me time. But I have learned to be so incredibly proud of being a mom, being a wife, and trying to do the best I can in those roles.
I think that's incredible. And I seriously love your book. The little excerpts that I've read and on your Instagram page, I hope everyone gets to read it because it's kind of mind-blowing, the different experiences that you have been able to have with your family. But let's start at the very beginning. You grew up in Millville, Utah.
Yep.
The youngest of 4 with 3 older brothers. What was it like growing up in a house full of boys and you're the baby?
I got beat up a lot. I think I was born with fire inside of me and a competitive drive inside of me, but having older brothers just ignited that. I wanted to be better than them. I wanted to be best at everything. And I think it definitely helped mold me into who I became, and I feel like I'm a very strong person. And even though I do think that I've worked on that myself, I do attribute a lot of my strength to my brothers.
I love that because I feel like it can go one way or the other, right? Like the only girl is sometimes just the little princess and, can do no wrong, or it just makes you crazy tough because you had to be. You said you were a total tomboy and super into sports from a young age. Was soccer always your main love?
Soccer was always my love. I loved everything. I mostly loved playing sports with boys because that's the world I knew. I played baseball. I didn't play softball. Eventually, as I got older, I played 1 year of softball and I was like, this is lame. I'm done. But soccer was always there. Soccer was my favorite from the very beginning. I just fell in love with it from when I was little.
At what point did you realize I'm good enough that I can play this at the next level?
Honestly, I didn't think about it that much. I think maybe it's because I grew up in a smaller town.
Yeah.
And, you didn't have social media and all these things where you kind of had those aspirations. It really wasn't until I was in high school and I started being recruited that I was like, oh,
okay,
I could do this in college. Like, none of my brothers played collegiate sports or anything like that. So I didn't have a lot of examples in my life of friends or family. But it kind of just came about organically and it made me really excited. I was like, well, obviously I want to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
At just 16 years old, you started having serious back pain and you found out that you'd fractured your 5th lumbar in 2 places.
Yeah.
That is crazy for a 16-year-old. What do you remember about that time?
I just remember I fought through a lot of pain. And it took it took months to find out why I was in pain. So during those months, I was just playing.
Yeah.
But I would just play through tons and tons of pain.
Was it a soccer injury? Did you do that playing soccer?
I think that it was a predisposition and it's more of like a stress reaction, right? It's like, I've kind of been told like, it's like a paper clip and you bend it and bend it and bend it and eventually it snaps.
Right.
It's kind of like that. And so I don't remember like one moment where I was injured, right?
Yeah.
It kind of just started coming on. It was really painful and losing, so eventually we found out and I had to sit, and losing soccer was incredibly hard. To sit on the sideline, as any athlete knows, sitting on the sideline and watching your teammates, it's really challenging and it forces you to learn and grow in ways that you wouldn't have otherwise. When we had our girls, everybody asks me, like, are you sad that none of your girls ended up playing soccer? And I'm just like, no, not at all. I wanted them to find something that they loved as much as I loved soccer, because sports teaches you so many lessons. And, being injured, unfortunately, most athletes know what it's like to be injured and go through that. And it takes a toll on you, but you learn and grow so much. I honestly feel like a lot of what I learned going through my injuries back when I was in high school and in college really prepared me for the challenges that I would face those 11 years living overseas.
Wow. As a 16-year-old girl, that is such a vulnerable time, too. That's a difficult time in a girl's life. How did you find the strength to push through that recovery process?
I had really good support. My parents were amazing. My teammates, they were great. They supported me. And I think I just had so much determination and enough competitive drive that I was like, well, this is not going to keep me down.
Yeah. And after months of recovery, you fought back. You eventually earned a scholarship to play Division I soccer at the University of Utah. What did that mean to you, especially coming back from a really difficult injury?
It meant a lot, honestly, because when I did get injured, there were some colleges that stopped recruiting me, and that was pretty devastating. But it meant so much because the coaches at the time at the University of Utah, they showed so much faith in me, regardless of my injury, and they saw more than that in me. And my time at Utah as a collegiate athlete is still so special. I love looking back on those years. They were really hard.
Yeah.
But some of the most amazing times as well.
Part of that hard is a few games into your freshman season, you got injured again, had a medically red shirt, and you were told by a doctor that you should quit soccer for the sake of your back. What was going through your mind when you were told that?
I was just lots of tears, honestly. I don't even remember what I was thinking. I just remember being so sad because it did feel like I was losing the one thing that really meant so much to me. And it was pretty scary. I did take that doctor's note and I went in and told my coach, I think I have to quit. I don't want to, have this affect the rest of my life and in a negative way or whatever. But my coach did something really amazing, which was she basically said, that's okay. You're still going to be a part of this team. Your scholarship is still here. Don't worry about it. Go get better.
Wow.
And that gave me the freedom to go get better and not stress about my future for that moment. And even though it was still so incredibly hard, I was able to go do some intensive things to improve and get stronger and heal. And I came back way better and was able to play the next, 3 years of my career. So it was a huge blessing and a testament to the faith that those coaches had in me. And I was really, really grateful to have them.
When you look back at the ups and downs of your collegiate career, I know you mentioned how special it is to you. What do you feel like stands out the most when you think of those 4 or 5 years?
How much I grew, how much I learned. It was the very beginning of my sophomore year when I met Chris. And he had just transferred from Duke. And I think that he immediately became the piece that I needed. And we started out as friends, and I think we just craved each other's friendship. We laughed a lot, and eventually we fell in love. And he was, our friendship, our experiences, our relationship is a huge part of my experience at Utah, along with my teammates and soccer. And, it was a whole package. And I think that that's where I really started to learn who I really was and what I really wanted.
When you guys first started dating, did you have any idea what you were signing up for with being a basketball player who might go pro?
I didn't think about it a lot while we were dating. It wasn't really until we got married that I when we were preparing to get married, that I started envisioning, what would our life look like? And to be quite honest, I'm really glad I didn't know.
Yeah.
because I'm not sure how I would have felt about it. And when we entered the professional world of basketball, we really entered it not knowing together.
Yeah.
We had to figure it out together. And I think that was special as well, because, you right from the very beginning of our marriage, we're living across the world. You have two choices. You either, like magnets, like move away from each other, or you just like slam together because you have no other option. We didn't have friends, we didn't have family, we only had each other. And I think that it really accelerated the learning curve of marriage for us, and we became incredibly tight, like immediately, because we had no other choice, right?
Yeah.
Like it was like, this is who we are, and we're doing this together.
You just had each other, and in these new cultures and new places, languages probably you didn't speak, right? Life in sports is so unpredictable. What made you believe you could build something stable together, even with all the uncertainty that comes with that?
I don't think I ever considered stability, honestly, until we had kids and they started getting older, to the point that we were like, oh, we would like them to be involved in activities and things. I didn't necessarily think about stability. I think that we created our life and we were very happy and we were really proud of it. And I took a lot of pride in, allowing my kids the opportunities and experiences that they would have by living overseas.
Yeah.
And, stability is a tricky thing in this business as a player and as a coach, right? Like, so our lives are still not incredibly stable.
Right.
Every single spring, our kids ask, are we moving? Are we staying here? Like, they want to know so that they can plan. They just know that it's a thing in this business, And so I do think stability has always been something that Chris and I created for our kids, regardless of where we were.
Yeah.
And the gospel also brought that into our lives, right? Like, you knew you had each other, and you knew you had the gospel. You knew you had Heavenly Father. You knew that you weren't alone, regardless of where we were. I was never alone. Even when Chris was on the road constantly and like I felt like I was alone, I knew that I wasn't alone. And trying to teach our kids that was really important.
You two created that stability for your family, regardless of where you were.
Yeah.
This is just for fun. I love the cover of your book. It's you standing on a basketball. You have high heels on, and you're still, I don't know, what, like 6 inches shorter than Chris. What's the height difference between the two of you?
I'm 5'6" and he's 6'11".
That's fun.
Yeah.
That's really fun.
Yeah, it's fun. And, so far our kids are all pretty tall. They've all got our boys are still too young to know exactly how tall they're going to be. And if they don't end up really tall, they're going to hate me forever.
They're like, we were the ones that were supposed to be tall. Yeah. Your life with Chris has taken you all over the globe, like you've mentioned. Can you name all of the countries you've lived in and how long you were in each place?
Okay. So Australia, we were in Australia for 2.5 seasons. And then the Philippines and Puerto Rico, those are both like short seasons that would kind of come at the end. So we would go straight from Australia to Philippines or straight from Australia to Puerto Rico. So we were in the Philippines 1 short season. We were in Puerto Rico for 3 short seasons. And then there was South Korea for 1 season. And then we were in Turkey. We lived in Turkey 3 different seasons. One was a half season, but they were 3 different cities. It was 3 different years, 3 different teams. We lived in Poland, again, 2 different teams, 2 different seasons, so 2 different cities. We lived in the Ukraine for about a half a season. And then we lived in the United Arab Emirates twice. One was in Dubai and the other one was in Abu Dhabi.
There is not a culture that you haven't experienced. Like almost literally, right, around the world.
Yeah.
You had to adjust so many times. What were some of the biggest cultural shocks that really stand out to you when you think about each different place you've been to?
It's funny because the culture shocks all came in, you'd think that it would be like big things, but it was all in little things. The daily, just the daily things, the smells and the foods and the, trying to grocery shop in the place where you're at, or finding your way around, or like even trying to have a somewhat of a conversation with someone. A lot of times I did try and learn parts of the language, just so that I could try and communicate a little bit. It was tricky because a lot of times we didn't live anywhere long enough to, like, right when you start to feel like you got the hang of it, we would leave. So we do know the most. I did learn the most Turkish because we were there for 3 different seasons. Our oldest daughter ended up being fluent in Turkish.
Wow.
And then, you leave and don't use it again.
Yeah.
When are you going to use Turkish? And so you just forget it all and move on to the next. Okay, well, now I'm learning Polish. And, when we were in South Korea, I learned to read and write so that I could try and navigate street signs, like even if I didn't know what the word meant, just to try and read it so that, and so there's just so many little things that make it challenging.
Then you're there with your kids and you're trying to help them adjust and make them feel comfortable. And you, like we've mentioned, you kind of were that stability for them in all these moves. What was their experience like? And now that they're older, they can obviously express this, but what was their experience like moving to all these different places?
It's interesting because I think they were young enough that they don't remember a lot. Most of their memories are moments. I don't think that they were old enough to realize the minutia of all the little things that it took. They just remember moments, which I love. I love listening to the moments that they remember because a lot of times I don't remember those moments. But they learned so fast. That's what's so great about kids is they're so adaptable. They're such an inspiration to me of how quickly they would adapt and how fast they would be okay with their new surroundings. And it was hard. Jet lag is hard. Jet lag with kids is way harder.
Oh my gosh, I can't imagine.
But I think that that's one of the things that they've been blessed with because of the life that we have lived is being flexible, being adaptable. And I think that will serve them well in their lives.
And you as the mom, you were kind of absorbing the difficulty probably of each situation and maybe shielding your kids a little bit. I just can't imagine how hard that would be for you. You don't have a group of friends or your family there. So for you personally, what kept you going with each move?
Honestly, the thing that kept me going was staying together. It was from the very beginning of mine and Chris's career, we decided whatever happens, wherever we go, we're staying together. Because that's how we chose. That's what we wanted. Not that we, disagreed with anyone who did it differently, but for us, being together was the most important thing. And it's funny because, the first couple weeks of every season was so hard. You're so homesick. You don't know where you are. You're affronted with all these different new things and you're trying to figure out what is culturally like normal here. And you kind of we would look at each other and be like, why are we doing this again? This is so hard. And the more kids we had, the harder it got.
Yeah.
But we always came back to staying together. And I loved watching Chris play, and he loved his career.
Yeah. And
that brought a lot of joy into our lives, being able to watch him and for him to experience a dream of his, which was to play professionally, And I think that it all came back to that, like protecting the joy we had with as a family and staying together.
We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, Lesa shares what it's like to support a husband in the spotlight, raise strong daughters in sports, and finding her footing again in the middle of chaos. This is her why. What's up, everybody? This is Lauren McLean. If you like this podcast, make sure you check out my other podcast, Royal Legacy, where we dive deep into the family connections of BYU sports. These families share stories of what led them to athletic greatness and how family has been a big part of how they got there. Download wherever you get your podcasts or on the BYU Radio app. Welcome back to Her Why. I'm Lauren McLean, here with Lesa Burgess, basketball wife and author of Behind the Bench. You've been around basketball for a long time, first traveling overseas during Chris's playing career, and now back in the college coaching world, which is completely different. What has the role of basketball wife looked like for you in this specific chapter of life?
It's funny because there are ways that it's harder and there are ways that it's easier than when he was playing. Obviously, we're in the States, kids are just going to school. It's easy. Supporting Chris as a coach was a new challenge because I knew what it was like to support him as a player. And when he became a coach, there was just a shift. He was gone a lot more. It just like a lot of things, it's the little things that make a big difference. Sometimes supporting Chris as a coach looks like being mid-sentence in a phone conversation and having him say, I got to take this. And just being able to say, okay, and hang up. And not feel any sort of negative emotions, right? Just being like, it's okay. Like, it's part of it.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of that. I think one of the biggest things is, you look at supporting him, and there are so many ways, but I feel like one of the biggest ways I support him is by teaching my kids to support him and what that support looks like. Like, there are a lot of times where Chris can't make it to our kids' things, games or, competitions or whatever it is. And I'm the only one there. Or I have 3 different kids, that have conflicting things, and I have to go to one and send the others without somebody. Mm-hmm. And the way I talk about Chris not being there determines how they feel about it. Mm-hmm. So for me, it's been really important to nail into them. He's not missing because he wants to. If he could be here, he would be.
Yeah.
But it's okay. He'll be there when he can be. And he is. Every time he can be, he's there. And it's just something that they now know and they're okay with. And every once in a while they're kids, right? Every once in a while they're going to be like, ugh, why is dad not here? Especially during, our boys play basketball.
Yeah.
So during basketball season, there's a lot of conflicts.
Yeah.
And so he misses a lot of basketball games for our boys. And if I were to, say, ugh, I'm so sick of your dad not being here, blah, blah, blah. That would affect how they view their father, right? And so one of the biggest ways that I feel like I support Chris is trying to teach my kids how to view that and how to support him and what supporting your spouse looks like and being positive about it, even though it's really hard. I've had to get really used to asking other people for rides or for help, right? Because I have to plan my days with my kids as if my husband's not going to be there to help. And if he is, it's a bonus.
That's so interesting. And you're totally right. How you paint the picture as the mom is totally how your kids are going to view it, for positive or for negative. Mm-hmm. From the outside, coaching can sometimes seem really glamorous, right? To us outsiders, like, oh, that'd be so fun to be a coach or a coach's wife and kids. But it's a lot of pressure, constant moving and never knowing what's next. Shout out to Annie Robinson, who's one of our producers. Her dad, Nick Robinson, has been a coach her entire life. He's at Kentucky now, is at BYU. What do you think people don't really see or understand about the coaching lifestyle behind the scenes, besides all the stuff that you already mentioned?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot, to be honest. I think it's incredibly challenging because the great thing about sports is that so many people are invested. But that's also really tricky because that creates a lot of pressure, that creates a lot of stress, a lot of expectations. And this business is brutal. It is very harsh. It is very unforgiving. And sometimes I think people forget that they're talking about people, people with families, people that are just trying to do their best to take care of their families. And, you have to ignore a lot. I do not go on social media during basketball season. I mean, I skim through a couple things. I might post a couple things. I do not read articles. I do not read posts. I do not read comments. And my friends all know that. So every once in a while, they'll send something positive and be like, hey, just thought, And I was like, cool, thanks. But I made the mistake of reading one comment that was a negative comment. And you take it so personally where the person might not have meant it personally, but
right.
So it's tricky, being in a business that is so harsh and in the public eye. There are some really amazing perks. It's really fun. It's a really fun career. It's a really fun life. Our kids get to experience these amazing, we took this season, we went to the Sweet 16 and we were able to go to the Big 12 tournament, to the first and second round. We went, so our kids are all a part of that. And it's an amazing, special experience that a lot of people wouldn't get to do.
Right.
So there are some really fun perks, and it is a really cool career, but there's a lot of tricky things. The stability thing, it's really tricky especially when your kids start to get older and they're in high school, and the idea of having to move who knows where,
Yeah.
You don't know. So
I think you're smart for your mental health to stay off of social media, because I wanted to ask you, are there any time where you're like, I want to fight you, like this fan, like you have no idea what you're talking about, just because they just say whatever, and they probably forget about it the next moment, right? But it's like you mentioned that it's personal for you.
Yeah, there was one game this season that at the end of the game, it was a really tough loss. And man, it hurt. And it's so personal.
Yeah.
It feels so personal. I'm not just watching the game, right? You feel everything about it. And it was a tough loss. And I kind of just sat in my seat and was watching everybody leave the arena. And I was like, it must feel so different to just be able to walk away and be like, well, tough loss. Oh, well. And just forget about it.
Yeah.
Right? Where for us, and luckily we're not alone. We have each other, all of the coaches' wives. You kind of are just like, ugh.
Yeah.
Or you celebrate together because you realize how hard everyone has worked for that moment, right? So there's just a lot of ups and downs, and you get used to figuring out how to work through those.
How important is it for you, speaking of that, to have these other wives and families, and maybe, for your kids, having the other kids that have people that actually understand what you're going through?
I think it's crucial. It is so important because we all want to be understood. And there are a lot of things within this business that you can't talk about. It ends with us, right? Chris will come home and say things to me. I can't go repeat those things to other people.
Right.
And so I think that having another coach's wife who totally, without speaking any words, understands everything. I mean, you don't even have to speak. You just give each other a hug, or you just give each other a look, and you feel supported. And you know that somebody gets it, even though a lot of people don't. Yeah. Some people do. And I think the kids feel that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's talk about your life right now, because even though the overseas chapters are behind you, things are still full speed ahead. You have 5 kids, KJ, Zoe, Ava, Beckham, and Zachary. Your 3 oldest daughters are competitive volleyball players, and you mentioned your boys are playing basketball. What's it like for you to be in full-blown sports parenting mode, going from, fully supporting Chris and his career, and now you're like, all right, let's bounce over to fully supporting my kids?
It's been a learning curve for sure, but I love it. I love watching my kids. There is nowhere I'd rather be than in a gym or at a field just watching the kids. it is, as a former athlete, and especially with Chris as a former athlete and a coach, I think we've had to be very purposeful about not being too critical, right? Not the expectations are not, we're going to hold you to these expectations, but also realize you're a kid.
Right.
And you're still learning. But the fun thing, honestly, about my girls playing volleyball is that neither Chris nor I knew anything about volleyball. And so we can't coach them.
Yeah.
I know a lot about volleyball now. I still can't coach them, right? So we just have to trust in their coaches. But we get to focus on the attitude, the body language, the mental side. And that's actually been kind of fun because I feel like as athletes, you learn a lot. So we were able to take a lot of what we learned and try and help our kids through their moments. And I think one of the trickiest parts has also been allowing them to figure it out themselves sometimes and just being supportive.
What's interesting, I feel like with coaches and former Division I athletes that have kids now, they either go one way or the other. They're either like, I don't want anything to do with the sports that you're involved in, or they fully embrace it, kind of like your kids have done. Your oldest daughter, KJ, started her college career at your alma mater, the University of Utah. What was it like seeing her wear that jersey that you once wore as a Division I athlete?
Yeah, it was a little bit surreal. And actually, when she got there, they didn't have her number available. And so she chose number 9, which was my number. Aww. And so the first few times I watched her play in that number 9 jersey, I mean, it's just heart-wrenching in a good way. It was surreal and emotional. I'm not a very emotional person, but it just made, it gave you all the feels and a lot of pride because how hard it is to get there.
Right.
And they did that. You didn't do that for them, right? They did that.
Yeah.
And so it's been amazing to watch them.
And KJ also has had some of her own injuries in collegiate sports. How have you been able to help her through that and from your own experiences?
Yeah, I think mostly it's just understanding.
Yeah.
And we have a really good relationship. And I think that there were times where she just felt like she needed somebody who understood what she was going through and how hard it was. And luckily, she's been able to come out on the other side and have a very successful career. She did end up transferring to Oklahoma, and she's so happy, and she's loving it, and she's healthy, and, she still does stuff every day to manage her body. But that's a great thing, as much as injuries suck, that's one of the great things they teach you is how you need to manage your own body, and you become very aware of what you need for, yourself. And so I think she's learned that, and she's been really successful because of it.
And then Zoe's now playing at Arizona State, right? And you have Ava at Lone Peak High School playing. So the chaos hasn't slowed down. How do you manage all the schedules, the emotions, the energy that come with having so many athletes in the house?
I think the emotions are the hardest part to deal with, especially with teenage daughters.
Yeah.
The schedules, I think I've become really good at managing schedules, but also our kids are really good at understanding. They know, with Kelly Jo, sorry, her name is Kelly Jo. KJ, half the time it just comes out. I don't know. With KJ at Oklahoma and Zoe now at ASU, their volleyball season is the same time as Ava's at Lone Peak. And so it's tricky. You can't beat everything. And we try and support them and get to some games, but they understand, mom and dad are only going to be here a few games of the season probably. And luckily now most of their games are televised, so we're able to watch and, talk about the game afterwards. But I think you just love them, and they know that you love them and support them. And not always does that look like you being in the stands.
Right. Well, how cool that your kids, too, have learned from all the different places they've been in that they're adaptable, you know? So even with all those things and their parents not being there, I'm sure they can handle it because they've been through a lot in a good way, right? They've experienced so many things.
Yeah.
Let's finish with where you are now. Chris is back coaching at BYU for the second time. What has this return to BYU been like for you personally?
So when Chris coached here from 2019 to 2022, that was our first experience with the BYU community. And it honestly felt like home. Like, we loved it. And we left for a couple years. And again, like in the coaching world, you just don't know what's in front of you. You can't try and predict what's going to happen a couple years down the road, even a year down the road. And so this season coming back to BYU has just been really special. It has felt like a full circle moment, even though this isn't where like we began, but we've just grown so much here. And I think BYU represents for us some stability and purpose and giving back to a community who's really embraced us. And raising our kids in airports and gyms and everything, like, I really feel like BYU feels like home. And again, we don't know what's going to happen, but we are so incredibly grateful to be here.
Well, I know the fans are incredibly grateful that you guys are here as well. You've seen this entire journey unfold. Duke, Utah, overseas, now BYU again. How do you think those twists and turns have shaped Chris, not just as a coach, but as a husband and as a dad as well?
I think that allowing yourself to be happy with a path that looks different than what you might have had in mind, there's so much growth there. And he is so patient and so loving, and so he's just amazing. And I think that it's this off-beaten path that nobody really expected of him that has allowed him to be who he is, especially the kind of coach he is. You know, he experienced so many different things as a player. I think that as a coach, he's able to take all of those things and impart all of his wisdom onto this next generation. And a second piece too, I think, is you really learn that Heavenly Father's plan is better than the one you have, even though it might look a whole lot different than what you expected. And as long as you trust Him and are brave enough to be flexible, things are great. Things work out, and they can be beautiful.
I want to end with that. I'm with Lesa Burgess. You are incredible. I hope everyone goes and reads your book and your incredible experiences. And thank you so much for taking the time with me today.
Thank you. So happy to be here.
Thanks to Annie Robinson for producing this episode with senior producer Cleon Wall. Her Why is a production of BYU Radio.